Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Houston Sports Talk back another video day, and today we're going to be talking about what the Chicago Bears offseason plan needs to be after hiring Ben Johnson. I think for the Chicago Bears, this has to be your dream hire for a head coach in hiring Ben Johnson. I mean, when you have a guy like Caleb Williams, who's such a great quarterback, but has some struggles in his rookie year, not having the right head coach next to him, that definitely is an issue. And sure, I think maybe it's a tiny, it's kind of a maybe a little bit of a difficult decision to make. Hey, we have such a great defense. Should we hire a defensive-minded head coach to lead this great defense, or do we prioritize our top pick quarterback? And I think when you say it like that, it has to be the QB. And I'm going to get into how you help out the defense, even though you hired an offensive-minded head coach in Ben Johnson. But I think this is going to be great for Caleb Williams and great for the offense, the Chicago Bears. Now, but like I said, this is a great Bears defense. I think if the Bears are going to win football games, and it was the few football games they did win in 2024, most of them was because of their defense. Their defense is very good, and look, their defense has a couple weak spots, but at the same time, their defense is really good, and won them most of the ball games they actually won, and there were a lot of games that they lost. Their defense actually played pretty well, but their offense was just really bad. And so I think the first thing you have to do, and we've already heard rumors about this, and I really think there's a good chance it happens, is find a really good defensive coordinator to add in next to this Bears defense. And we've heard Dennis Allen. I love it. Dennis Allen, former Saints head coach. I don't think Dennis Allen is a great head coach at all. But I've talked about this so many times. There are guys that are great offensive or great defensive coordinators, but are not meant to be head coaches. Like, look at Josh McDaniels. I think he's one of the best offensive coordinators I've ever seen in the game of football, but is also at the same time one of the worst head coaches I've seen coach in football. There are examples of great guys, great coaches that are great at what they do as in the coordinator game, whether it's defensively or offensively. But then when they get the chance to lead a team, they're really bad at it. But I think Dennis Allen was a great part for the Saints team. I mean, Saints had a great defense. He was the defensive coordinator back when Sean Payton was with them, and then once Sean Payton decided to take a year off, that's when, obviously Dennis Allen became the head coach, and he wasn't very good at that and just got fired this year. But anyways, I think he'll be a great defensive coordinator and definitely has a great defense alongside him leading this defense. So I think he'll be great if the Bears decide to hire him. And I think that has to be one of the first things this Bears team does this offseason is hire former Saints head coach Dennis Allen to be the defensive coordinator of the Chicago Bears. And then you have Ben Johnson as the head coach and also calling the plays for this Bears offense. You already know Ben Johnson's going to be playing, he'll be doing the play calling. And then obviously Dennis Allen would be the defensive coordinator. So let's get to players, because as good as Dennis Allen is as a defensive coordinator and Ben Johnson is as a play caller and should be as a head coach, it's not like Dennis Allen and Ben Johnson magically just fix everything. There's more that has to be done with this Bears team. There's a lot that I think has to be done, and we're going to get into that. Thank God this Bears team has a top 10 pick, and we're going to get into that in just a second. But I think one of the most important things I want to talk about early on is the Bears do have $66 million in cap space. So that's one of the good things this offseason with the Bears is that, Ben Johnson's coming in right away, going to be working with Ryan Poles, and they're gonna try to improve this team, and they have good resources to do that, being in a good position in cap space. And I have a way for them to get in even a better position in the cap space, and that's by making a roster cut. And that's one of the first things you see teams do in offseason moves. And one of the players I think the Bears need to cut right away starting into the offseason is Gerald Everett, tight end, who was fantastic with the Chargers a couple years in L.A. In 2 seasons, L.A. had 1,000 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns of being the tight end for them. But then the Bears signed him to a to a 2-year, $12 million deal. He comes to Chicago. He only has 36 receiving yards, no touchdowns, 13 targets, 8 receptions. I get he's a solid tight end. He's a good backup to have, but no backup tight end should be making $6 million a year that is not even having 100 receiving yards in a season. So with that case, if you ask me, Gerald Everett needs to be cut. That can save you some good money and definitely make it a little bit more flexible in the spending in the offseason, cutting some of that cap space with Gerald Everett, who's a backup tight end making $6 million a year. So I think that's one of the first things you do this offseason is cut Gerald Everett. And I think there are options that I'm going to get into that you can replace Gerald Everett to be the new backup tight end of this franchise, who are way better and way cheaper. And I have 2 names that I will get into that I think the Bears could sign that I'll get into in just a minute. So let's get into the most important thing. It's the offensive line. Caleb Williams had a great season, but he was also like the worst. He was the most sacked quarterback in football. And that's going to continue if you have this current offensive line. This year it was an offensive line of Larry Borum, Tevin Jenkins, Coleman Shelton, Matt Pryor, and Darnell Wright. Darnell Wright is actually pretty good, and so is their center, Shelton. And I have those 2 guys staying in the offensive line, but you have to make additions to this offensive line. You cannot have Caleb Williams back-to-back years, being constant fear that he's going to get hit. And Caleb Williams also has to work on this too, because let's not all blame on Caleb Williams. I've seen so many plays this year where he doesn't throw the ball away. The offensive line, yes, it needs to be better. Sure. But Caleb needs to get better at throwing the football away if the offensive line fails him. But the offensive line shouldn't be failing him, and that's why we're going to get into what they need to do to try to make that better and try to protect your franchise quarterback. Let's start off with having the number 10 overall pick. You need a left tackle. Left tackle this year was not a bright spot for this team. Draft from Texas, a stud, Kelvin Banks Jr., who was an All-American and had a great season at Texas in 15 games. Absolute amazing season with the Longhorns this year. And I think he'd be a great fit for this Bears team. And then your 2 tackles would be the last couple years drafting, Darnell Wright, and then obviously this year it'd be Kelvin Banks Jr. And that's a great way to, a couple years ago Darnell Wright, and that's a great way to. I think it's a great way to protect Caleb Williams. So let's get into what else you need to do. It's not just Kelvin Banks, because I think there's way more I have that needs to be done. It's Kelvin Banks, and then there are other ways I think to improve this offensive line. I think another part of this team is maybe right guard, and I think what you're going to see is some Lions players heading over to Chicago. You've seen it with a couple head coaches over the last couple years, coaches that are going to have a big say in what the new coaches that have a big say into the offseason. Like, look at D'Amico Ryans or Dan Quinn in the last couple years with their respected teams. D'Amico Ryans leaves San Francisco, goes to Houston. Next thing you know, a lot of San Francisco players are going to Houston these last couple seasons. Then same thing with Dan Quinn this last offseason. Dan Quinn, Dallas defensive coordinator, goes to Washington, and a bunch of Dallas defenders and players in general start going to Washington. So I think there are going to be quite a few Detroit players that end up going to the Chicago Bears. And the first one I have is right guard Kevin Zeitler. He's a one-time Pro Bowler with Baltimore in 2023 and started 16 games for the Lions this year at right guard. And I think he'd be a great addition to replace Matt Pryor, who wasn't very good this season with the Bears in 17 games with 15 starts at right guard. And he's not really even a guard. He's more of a tackle than a guard. So I think that Kevin Zeitler would be a great addition to protect Caleb Williams even more. Now, I'm not done, because I think you you have to continue to improve it. The Bears have 2 second-round picks. They draft 39 and 41. And I think from Ohio State, who would be great for them, is Donovan Jackson. Donovan Jackson can play guard and tackle, but the Bears can put him at left guard. He's had 13 games this year at Ohio State and has looked really good at Ohio State. And he would replace Tevin Jenkins, who has been their left guard. So then the offensive line looks completely different. At left tackle, you have Kelvin Banks Jr. At left guard, you have newly drafted Donovan Jackson. And then at center, I think the Bears should re-sign Coleman Shelton. I think this is the only guy that the Bears should actually bring back from their offensive line from this season, outside of Darnell Wright. I think Coleman Shelton's probably the only guy from this Bears offensive line that is not Darnell Wright that should be back. Coleman Shelton had 17 games with 17 starts, had a great career had a really good couple years with the Rams, won a Super Bowl with Los Angeles. So I think he'd be great to have back in Chicago. So then the offensive line looks like would have Banks and Jackson on the left side, which having 2 rookies on the left side could be a little bit dicey, but 2 really good rookies to have. And then Coleman Shelton at center, and then you have Zeitler and Wright on the right side at right tackle and right guard. So that, I think, would make things a lot better for Caleb Williams. But let's get into one free agency signing that I think needs to be done if things aren't better. The Bears need to sign a quarterback. Look, I'm not going to say that Caleb Williams is going to play bad and you need to have a quarterback to replace him, but let's not act like this is the guy that got hit the most in football last season. So that being said, this is the guy that was sacked the most last year. When someone gets sacked a lot, we all know what can happen. We don't want it to happen, but an injury can happen. The Bears need to go sign a backup quarterback. Tyson Bagent, he's solid. He got to start a couple games a couple years ago when Justin Fields got banged up a little bit. He's okay. He had some good moments, but I don't think he's good enough to win football games for the Chicago Bears. So I think the Bears go get a guy who has stepped up before and won ball games when a quarterback has gone down. I'm thinking about a guy like Joe Flacco or Jacoby Brissett, guys who are always ready to go and are good, can be really good coming in. And that makes me think of Jacoby Brissett or Joe Flacco. And I think those would be great additions to come in and also, back up Caleb Williams and come in if they need to. And also, if you're Caleb, you could learn a lot from a Super Bowl champion like Joe Flacco, or you can learn a lot from a Jacoby Brissett who's been in the league since 2016. So that could be a learning experience. You're not really learning anything when your backup is a second-year quarterback, but you can learn more when your backup has been in the league for a long time, like a 40-year-old Joe Flacco or a Jacoby Brissett who's nearing on 10 years in the league. So that would be great for a standpoint point of we have a great backup if anything happens to Caleb, and he can learn from this guy. But so that's my point on getting a backup quarterback. Now I mentioned, the Bears need to cut Gerald Everett. I have a couple of names I'd like the Bears to go pick up if they do cut him, which $6 million a year to be a backup tight end, need to cut him. 2 guys I really would like to see them pick up, either Jordan Akins or Tanner Hudson. Jordan Akins with the Browns had a really strong year for a backup. 17 games, 6 starts, 40 receptions, 390 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns. David Njoku getting healthy next year. I don't really see the Browns being super interested in re-signing him. So I'd like to see the Browns make a case for him. And then Tanner Hudson. Tanner Hudson with the Bengals has also won a Super Bowl with Tampa, but he didn't play much with Tampa. Tanner Hudson had 154 receiving yards and a touchdown in only 11 games, missing 6 games. Last year had 12 games, 1 start, 352 receiving yards and 1 touchdown. I mean, these guys were better than Gerald Everett this year, and I still think they would be better than him. and would cost less money. Not, I mean, you don't have, I don't, look, you're going to have to give Tanner Hudson and Jordan Akins some money, but it's not going to cost $6 million a year for Tanner Hudson or Jordan Akins. So I'd like to see one of those guys come in and back up for Cole Kmet. I think that'd be a great fit. So moving on from that, we're going to get into the wide receiver position, which is key. Keenan Allen is a free agent, and I'd love to see the Bears re-sign him. Six-time Pro Bowler, should be back in Chicago. Played 15 games, 744 receiving yards, 7 touchdowns. Had a great season, and should be back in Chicago with the wide receiver trio of Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, and Keenan Allen. But I also think the Bears should add to this wide receiver room. Add in a wide receiver 4. I think add in a wide receiver 4. This is another guy from Detroit. Like I said, I think Ben Johnson's going to be interested in adding in guys that he's been with in Detroit. I think Tim Patrick would be a good fit. 16 games, 9 starts, 44 targets, 33 receptions, 400 receiving yards, and 3 catches, 3 touchdown catches on the season. I think he'd be a great wide receiver 4 fit for this team. Now let's get into the rest of the draft. And then I'm going to get into one final free agency signing for this Bears team. Now, the Bears have the 41st overall pick. I think you could use an edge rusher, and that's why I think the Bears should draft a stud from Ohio State, Jack Sawyer. So I have the Bears drafting Jack Sawyer, number 41 overall. He played 15 games with 2 fumble recovery touchdowns, and he also had a total of 9 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, 56 combined tackles, 1 interception, and 7 passes defense, 3 fumble recoveries, returned for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns, with 3 forced fumbles. This guy's a stud, and if you can get him in the second round, this is a great price for Jack Sawyer, and he will be a stud in Chicago, especially if he's in this great Bears defense, alongside giving pressure with Montez Sweat. Montez Sweat and Jack Sawyer would be a great defensive end duo. And you have Dennis Allen as your defensive coordinator. Jack Sawyer would have a lot of success in Chicago, if you ask me, and would be a great fit at number 41 for this Bears offense. For this Bears defense. Next pick, the Bears need a running back. DeAndre Swift had a lot of good games, but he also had a lot of bad games. So with number 72 overall, I think the Bears should draft Ollie Gordon, who was Offensive Player of the Year in 2023. I think he'd be a great fit for this team. This year had 900 rushing yards on 190 rushing attempts with 13 rushing touchdowns. He averaged 74 rushing yards per game, 29 receptions, 180 receiving yards, and a touchdown. I'm not going to say he's better than DeAndre Swift. He'd have to prove that in the league. Also, Rashawn Johnson is really good as a long-run fan, I'll say. But at the same time, DeAndre Swift has a lot of issues in the run game, had a lot of bad games, had some games where he struggled against good run defenses. And at some point in this draft, the Bears need to draft a running back next to Rashawn Johnson and DeAndre Swift, and I think this would be the good time to do that. So, and then the final addition I think this Bears team needs to make is another addition from the Lions, and I think the Bears could use a defensive tackle. That's why I think they should draft Levi Onwuzurike. Levi actually had a really solid season in 2024, 16 games, 10 starts. He had 1 forced fumble, 2 sacks, 30 tackles, 1 tackle for loss, and a total of 13 QB hits for this Lions defense. I think he'd be a great addition. So, full recap to the defense. I don't think there's much to add because this Bears defense was really good this year. But at the same time, I think you can add some more pass rushing, and that's why I say you sign former Lion Levi Onwuzurike, who's a great pass rusher since he almost had 15 QB hits this year and knocked a fumble out and had 2 sacks, only starting in 10 games with the Lions. And also Jack Sawyer, who's a complete stud from Ohio State. And you improve the defense by making the defensive coordinator Dennis Allen. On the offensive side, which needs more improvements, which is, look, I have 3 things that the defense needs to do this offseason with Sawyer, Levi, and Allen. That's it. The offense needs a lot more, I think. I think you got to cut Gerald Everett, you got to sign to replace him, one of Tanner Hudson or Jordan Akins, which would be a great fit for the backup tight end position. The offensive line, like I said, add in Banks and Jackson in the draft and Zeitler in free agency from the Lions and re-sign the center Coleman, and that's a good way to improve this offensive line. If the offensive line doesn't improve, which you hope it does, but in case it doesn't, that's why you need to sign a backup quarterback who can come in and it can be an insurance blanket for this Bears offense and also a potential leader for Caleb Williams. You can learn things from a Flacco or from a Brissett. Then at the wide receiver position, like I mentioned, re-sign Keenan Allen. That's huge. Add in Tim Patrick to be the new wide receiver 4. And then, like I mentioned, at running back, draft Ollie Gordon. And I really think that's it for this Bears team, what you need to do this offseason, adding in Ben Johnson. And if you do that, I think this Bears team can go from winning 5 games this season to going. I think you can go from 5-12, and if you do what I said to do in the offseason, I think they can go from 5 wins to 7-9, which is really good. I think it's a really good improvement. Maybe at the most 10. Let me know your thoughts on what I think the Bears' offseason plan should be, and peace out.